today. We have Climate Jobs Rhode Island. If you haven't heard of them already, you will. They're doing amazing work bringing justice and equity to a green economy. I'll let them explain it because they explain it a whole lot better. But if the Climate Jobs team doesn't mind going around and just introducing themselves and their titles and how long they've been with the org, that would be great.
Sure. My name is Michael Rolls. I'm the executive director of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. I started same time that Erica did. We were the first two staff members in September 2021. Pass it to Erica.
Hi, everyone. Great to see so many both familiar and new faces. My name is Erica Hammond. I'm the field director with Climate Jobs Rhode Island, and I'll send it over to Aislinn Hanley.
Hi, everyone. Aislinn Hanley. I'm the policy coordinator with Climate Jobs Rhode Island. I've been with them full-time for a few months, but I've been part-time since last year. And I will pass it to David.
Hi, everybody. I'm David Booth. I came from the building trades. Actually, I was a trade worker for about 25 years. I came from the painters. Until last year, I was a journeyman rank and file trade member. I'm also on the e-board of the Painters Union for IUPAT Local 195, recording secretary. And I'm now working with Climate Jobs as of February this year as a field coordinator, primarily working in offshore wind. Nice to be here. And I will pass it to Ariana.
Hi, I'm Ariana Jimenez, and I am this year's University of Rhode Island's Energy Fellow.
Fantastic. We have a lot of your work to cover now because you seem to be doing a little bit of everything, but a lot of good. So why don't you start by just explaining what is Climate Jobs Rhode Island?
Yeah. So Climate Jobs Rhode Island, we're a coalition of about 36 labor organizations, environmental groups, and community groups committed to working toward a just transition to a net zero economy, making sure that it centers workers and communities who have historically been left behind. And we do this by developing policy solutions and also through programs that lead to collaboration with people and stakeholders across communities. That includes government, state agencies a lot, labor organizations and labor unions, nonprofits, environmental groups, community members. And just a quick, to clear up any confusion, we do not directly run workforce training programs. We do that through a lot of our other partners. Our other partners do a lot of that. But when we look at the transition to a net zero economy, we really are looking at an entire reimagining of the economy. Probably the biggest transition since the Industrial Revolution. And what we don't want to do is make the same mistakes from the Industrial Revolution. When workers were abused, unprotected, not treated fairly, we had huge wealth gaps from the richest to the poorest. People were not treated fairly, not paid fairly, and millions were not paid at all. And instead they were imprisoned on plantations. We need a regenerative economy that works for people, and that's what we envision, where everyone has access to clean air and clean water, and everyone has access to a good paying, rewarding career that sustains themselves and their families. And most importantly, through climate jobs, the process is just as important as the outcome. So we need to ensure that frontline workers and frontline community members are in the room and at the tables where decisions are made. So that policy is built through their own personal experiences and expertise. Just a quick background on the founding of Climate Jobs. In the fall of 2020, labor unions and environmental groups came together to unpack some historic substantive disagreements. The Barrowville power plant situation that happened in the mid-2010s was a big issue that really fractured those relationships. They worked to, unpack that situation and historic disagreements on other things, and really to chart a path forward to work together. We have a lot of shared vision and values among the communities, and what they did was they spent months working through a shared set of principles and values upon which they can work together on a collective vision and set of goals. And it's really that shared set of principles that is the strength of how this coalition that is very diverse in interests and in groups and people, how the coalition is really able to move together and work together in a uniform direction. And it really has enabled us to move forward on issues that historically would have been very unrealistic had that process of setting the values and principles at the beginning not happened at the very beginning. And in terms of why we do it this way, I'll pass it off to Erica.
Thanks, Mike. So one of the major reasons, and one of, I guess I would say the most obvious reasons why this coalition came together, climate change is very much upon us. So Rhode Islanders are experiencing the extreme effects of climate change every single day. We're seeing it on a day like today with severe flooding, and I couldn't exit my street the proper way because it's already flooded. Things like that, things like warming and rising sea level rise, threatening our coastlines, increased extreme heat days. And one of the major things that we focus on here at Climate Jobs is that climate change impacts workers significantly and their families, as well as frontline communities as well. And every environmental issue is a worker issue. So when we're thinking about things like the policy and the legislation and different issues that we're working on, we're thinking about them through specifically a worker lens, and we're bringing in the workers who are most impacted and are first impacted in not just our solutions to climate change, but also in the extreme effects of climate change. So just to give some more specific Rhode Island examples, when we're thinking about climate change and its impacts as a worker issue, we're thinking about things like extreme high heat days. So that affects construction workers on job sites who may not have access to water breaks and properly shaded areas. Those are extremely severe health and safety conditions for workers on job sites. And I see one of our coalition members, Raikash, Rhode Island Committee on Occupational Safety and Health, runs a number of great trainings and has one specifically on high heat for workers as well. So I urge you to check that out when it comes around this year. But other things are school communities are significantly impacted by increased high heat days. So we saw this last year. Some schools had to close early because of extreme heat days. In many of our, we know the state, many of us of our public schools in Rhode Island, many of them are in dire need of replacement. Many of them have antiquated heating and cooling systems that simply don't heat or cool our buildings as they should, and create incredibly uncomfortable environments, learning environments for our students, and also the individuals who work in those buildings every day. We also see that with package carrier workers. I don't know if many of you were following the negotiations that happened between UPS workers and the Teamsters, but they were able to incorporate a green clause in their collective bargaining agreements that would require all of their package delivery cars or trucks have air conditioning, which sounds incredibly surprising, at least to me at first when I first heard that they didn't already have air conditioning in their trucks. But that led to extremely severe working conditions, leaving many workers really puts their lives at stake, and unfortunately some even lost their lives because of extreme heat stroke. So many of these extreme effects of climate change are impacting workers first and worst, and also not just when we're thinking about the effects of climate change, but also our solutions to climate change. So as some of you I think already know, I see a lot of our Climate Jobs partners on this call. Rhode Island has mandatory emissions reduction mandates that the Act on Climate has set. We also have ambitious renewable energy goals that are not just ambitious, but necessary to combat climate change to the scale that it demands. And as Rhode Island charts out its path on how it's going to plan out how it meets each of these goals, it's imperative that workers are at the center of each of these solutions. And that's something that Climate Jobs works to incorporate every single day in our work. So when we're thinking about things like the building sector, we're thinking about energy and utility workers, we're thinking about transportation industry. Each one of those solutions incorporates a worker and their families. So just kind of setting the tone as to why this work is so important and so intersectional for our coalition. And to give, as David mentioned, he's someone who has direct experience working as a tradesperson. David, I'll hand it over to you to share personal story too.
There's more extreme weather days. I don't even want to say heat because it's all kinds of weather. And conditions are more volatile all over the place. I'm one of those people who's out there. And construction workers are at the highest risks for things like asthma and chronic cough, and something called dyspnea, which is when no matter how much air you take in, you just don't feel like you're getting enough air to your organs. And if you're lucky, like me, you get all three of those things. Um, I'm joking, but it's very real. My experience is that the air quality is noticeably poor, and I just happen to be one of those people who's particularly sensitive to that. So, it's harder to breathe. It's harder to have enough energy, and over time, that compounds. It doesn't do great things for your longevity, and it's not getting better for construction workers in that realm. It's very real. And on the other side of things, if you're a person, maybe you own a business and you have a lot of money, and that's not really your realm of concerns, it still affects productivity. It affects the bottom line. It really affects everything, and we're all interconnected, and that's why it's so important to build these coalitions, because it's wonderful to have gotten these mandates, but without the actions that we're taking, mandates don't have any teeth. They're not much more than words. So it's good to be able to look around at all the entities involved, what their stakes are, and be able to have those conversations from a way that understands their point of view, and show that, like, we're all on the same side. We're trying to do the same things, and that's how you build your coalitions and your momentum. Brings us to building our coalitions. And we're all interconnected, and it's helpful to zoom out and look how everybody is affected to your issue. And the better we understand the needs and the concerns of all the impacted communities, we start to understand really what the issues are and how to turn these concerns into ways to make things happen and make everybody happy, and not just ways to say no to making things happen. So it starts to inform your process too. It really makes things easier. You build momentum, you build coalitions, and it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but we say, we don't know what we don't know, but there's always somebody else that knows something else, right? Each one of us is an expert in our own realm, and that's something that deserves to be brought to the table and heard and considered. And each one of us can do a little bit, and we all get a lot. And it just, the more people you work with, it just starts to inform your process and make things easier, which is why building the coalition is so important.
Thanks, David. That was great. And so I know that Mike had touched on this a little bit in the introduction as to how the coalition came about, but I'll go a little bit further into detail. I won't go into too much detail on our principles, because those can be found directly on our website, which is climatejobsri.org. You can look through the principles that the coalition, right during its founding, its first couple of months, put together as a group. But each of those climate jobs principles can really be boiled down into three major pieces. That's climate, justice, and jobs. So when we're working on different policies, different issues, different pieces of legislation, and different projects, we are constantly asking ourselves as a climate jobs team a number of different questions. But some of those include things like, does this positively impact, or does this positively move forward our action on climate change? Does this meet our Act on Climate goals? How does this work impact currently, or specifically the workers who are working on these projects? Things like, how does it impact the workers who are maintaining our gas systems and have been for decades? What are those impacts? Also, things like, does this issue advance racial equity and economic equity throughout our communities. So each of those pieces are core pillars to all of the work that we do, and we're constantly asking ourselves many of those questions to make sure that when we're working on a project, it's one that directly aligns with our climate jobs principles. So some of the ways that we've been able to be as successful in such a short time is a true testament, I think, to the broad and diverse coalition that we've continued to grow. It seems like every month we've been growing our coalition, but also a testament to a lot of the work that happened really even before Mike and I were there, but continues to happen every single day. And those were those tough conversations that Mike alluded to at the beginning of his introduction into climate jobs, and doing the really hard and the difficult work up front. We constantly use this terminology over and over again, and that's we have to move at the pace of trust. And what that means in practice is we have to make sure we're having the difficult conversations about the work that we're doing. Asking ourselves the questions that I highlighted. How will this impact workers? How is this advancing racial and economic justice throughout our communities? And is this in alignment with our Act on Climate mandates? We constantly have to have many of those difficult conversations up front to make sure that we are touching all bases, but also, as David mentioned, we don't know what we don't know. So we have to make sure we have all of the different trades in the room who have, whether it's work equity on projects or who will be impacted in a transition to a green economy. We need to make sure we have every single person in the room who is actually going to be affected by this, whether it negatively or positively. That's the opposite of negative. To make sure that we fully understand each of the different issues and policies that we're working on. So a perfect example of the way that we had some of those difficult conversations is through the Providence's most recent carbon neutral municipal buildings ordinance. It's a long name. But the way that we were able to accomplish that is we had a number of conversations with our labor partners and environmental advocates, and really the strong partnerships that we had with both the City Council, Councilor Andrew Bois, Council President Miller, and also the Mayor's administration and their team, to really be able to understand what we wanted to see in this ordinance, what would have the most impact, but also how can we do that in a way that is centering workers and it's not going to negatively impact the workers who are already maintaining not only our gas systems, but also doing all the construction and maintenance on these systems that are connecting to our building infrastructure. So that ordinance was able to happen in, what was it, nearly 6 months. And that was something that we thought was going to take even longer to have some of those really core important conversations. But when you make sure you have all of those folks in the room and have some of those difficult conversations up front, you can really establish that trust. And that's how you move the process forward in an efficient way. It only, slows down the process when there are, missteps or skipped steps, and the people aren't brought into the room to fully understand what these impacts will be. And that's what slows things down. And that's what we want to make sure we're not doing amongst our coalition. We want to have the difficult conversations first, because that's how we effectively move forward on each of our issues.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. That's exactly a very poignant point, is that it actually sometimes, in this work, you get accused of slowing up progress because you want to listen and speak with everybody. But as Erica said, it really actually makes things easier and builds momentum. I know in my world, for example, a lot of this work is pretty similar to the work that's already being done, but some of it's different. And, when you've working in historical trade that really hasn't changed too much in my case, a couple 100 years, and someone's asking you to do something different, it takes a lot to accept that. And also, not only that, but you have these questions of, okay, well, now things are changing. Is this viable? Is this permanent? And so there's a lot of unease there. So knowing that these conversations have already been had and these concerns have been considered is really enormous in getting people to sign on and wanting to work with you. And that's really the only way to get it done. And so, working at the pace of trust is something that we like to say, because, we're not trying to hold everything up. We're actually moving as fast as we believe as is possible, the best way possible.
And I'll just go into some quick examples of the work that we are doing. And, Aislinn will talk a little bit more about on the program side, what we're working on. And then Erica will talk a little bit about more of the collaborations that we're working on with other stakeholders. But most people on this call might be familiar with a lot of our state legislative work. It's been a heavy core component of our work over the years. We are starting to do more programmatic things starting in the last year or so. But I'll just run through the list of previous legislative agenda items that we were able to win because of this process that was established at the front end. Number one, starting with the Act on Climate in 2021, that was before Erica and I came on staff. It was the first sort of go with the coalition actually after having launched in partnership with Labor and Environment. The Act on Climate was passed a few months later. The 100% renewable energy standard was a bill that we worked on in partnership with Green Energy Consumers Alliance that requires a 100% use of renewable energy certificates in the mix by 2033. Integrating strong labor standards in renewable energy projects was another bill that we were able to get passed in our second year. And then full lead service line replacements across the entire state was another thing that we were able to do in collaboration with the Childhood Lead Action Project. One example I do want to dive into a little bit more is the solar siting legislation that we passed last year. It might be no secret to many people on this call how many years it took. I think it took about 7 or 8 years for advocates who were originally pushing the solar siting bill to pass. Last year, based on the collaborations that we were able to put together among all of the stakeholders, from the people who build the solar projects to the folks that have very deep interests in making sure that our core forests are protected, we were able to actually negotiate a path forward and figure out a good bill to pass. And so as soon as we were able to get all stakeholders on board, we were able to get some good solar siting policy passed last year. I'll pass it off to Aislinn to talk a little bit about more of the programmatic things that we are doing in collaboration with some decision makers and state agencies, especially as it reflects on the federal funding side of things.
Thanks, Mike. So one of the major components of my job is federal fund tracking and how we kind of connect that with decision makers, government and state agencies, and the input that we provide on program design. So 2 years ago, Climate Jobs made the strategic decision to start tracking the federal funds from the Biden-Harris administration that were coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. But those funds are the largest investment into the country's infrastructure since the New Deal of the 1930s. So it's a really big pot of money, and it's getting a lot of great work done. It's a big deal, for sure. So we focus a lot of our time tracking federal funding. I've been keeping a matrix of federal funds, and we keep a list of who this is applicable to. I'll run them past Mike. We'll figure out, okay, who can apply for this? Who else can help collaborate on this? So we do a lot of coordinating with the state agencies. We will also help in ways like writing letters of support, connecting folks to each other and figuring out how they can support each other's applications. We also provide input on labor standards and worker protections for program design. Many of the grants are tied to labor standards or workforce development, so that is a big component. And we want to be sure that we're actually seeing these protections put into the applications and then that they're actually being done. We're really doing this because we want to make sure that these projects funded through these programs are leading to family-sustaining careers and providing a pathway to the middle class. That's what a lot of union jobs are doing. They're pathways to the middle class. We want to expand access to these jobs and ensure that there is a path to these jobs to communities and individuals who need them most. We also want to ensure that there's pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship utilization, so folks are earning while they learn and they're securing good, high-paying union jobs. This is a main focus of ours, really, because these grants are so intersectional, as is our work. They're labor, environment, housing, all sorts of issues. And as David has mentioned, we don't know what we don't know. And prior to Climate Jobs, and you had a lot of different groups or activists, missions kind of island. We don't want to just be on one mission. We want to make sure that these great programs are being fully utilized and that we're connecting folks. A lot of these applications, they don't want to just see, just a focus on one area. They want to see, how is this going to benefit the community? How is this going to increase access to jobs? How is this going to better the environment? So we assist in connecting folks, and we're able to bring the strength of our coalition that has a multitude of visions and just different strength and experience, and we're able to reflect that in these applications. And we're really doing that because we want to see that these proposals are actually leading to effective change. And when the applications reflect that, it really does heighten the chance of project approval. We really want to maximize these investments and ensure that there is a just transition to a green economy that works for all of us and all of our causes. So this process and collaboration with agencies and government, we're allowing workers' voices to be represented and heard at the table, and making sure that the working class is heard in these applications. And I think I will pass it to Erica to speak a little bit more on collaboration with workers and labor organizations.
Thanks, Hazelyn. So to give one of our most recent examples of the ways that we've been collaborating amongst workers and labor organizations, and also our state coalitions regionally, so specifically our state coalitions or climate jobs coalitions in both Massachusetts and Connecticut, is this tri-state offshore wind procurement that has come up. I don't know how many folks on this call are familiar with, but there's a very large tri-state offshore wind procurement that came up the end of last year. And bids were just due by many offshore wind developers, or came in by many offshore wind developers just yesterday. So some of the work that we've been doing on this front is we've been working on a regional offshore wind campaign, and we've been working on, we've done this through that group of Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, both labor unions and the building trades, and the Climate Jobs Coalition, some of our environmental partners as well, have all been a part of those conversations that resulted in drafting a set of demands that we would need to see from developers with strong labor standards, both on the construction of each of these offshore wind turbines, but also through the operations and maintenance, which that's the key piece. That piece and the supply chain piece is how we keep all of these jobs local. That's how we invest and expand in local jobs. The construction component is a huge component, but that's just one piece of it. So we need to make sure that we're holding on to each of these pieces to make sure we lock in those jobs for our local communities as well. So one of the things that we've done through that campaign process, that tri-state offshore wind process, is send those letters with each of those demands to the 4 developers that we were, I guess we can say we now know we're planning to bid in this offshore wind procurement. And we've also set up meetings with each of those developers, and those meetings included our state federations, which is our state AFL-CIOs, the leadership from each of them in each state, and our building trades unions in each state, to have conversations with the principal officers in each of these developers, as well as start having conversations with our state and local government. So we had a very, very productive conversation with the folks from the governor's office and the Office of Energy Resource, the DLT, also the DPUC and the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, around what we wanted to see what we needed to see in those demands as well, just to make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction and make sure that we lock in those jobs here as well. And I think I will pass it over to David. Did you want to share some examples about, David's been doing a really great job of planning out how we're going to start incorporating additional outreach to our rank and file membership around some of these some of these different projects. And David, do you want to share about what you've been thinking about to plan that out as well?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a few different things, just of like, also some examples of how this works and why this works. So one of the things is that a great example is this thing that we're talking about right now is like such a tremendously huge deal, but most people don't know about it. It's a little esoteric to talk about, first of all, but the point I'm getting at is that when the people who have the power to make these decisions are aware that the public is aware of it, it becomes sometimes a different conversation because now they know that people are looking at them to do the right thing. So that's the part of it that I try to bring to the table whenever possible. And so there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Some of this work, actually, ironically, we're talking about collaborations, and the reason actually I ended up here is exactly because of that. And one of the things that we were doing was last year, well, for several years, we've been working on wage theft legislation, but now, wage theft in Rhode Island is now a felony. And a lot of that was because of not only the work that was done on the legislation side, but what we would do on our end is rally everybody that we could find to go hang out in front of the State House and make a bunch of noise. That's one way that we can get people aware that this is going on and that, we're waiting for an answer on what they're going to do for us. It depends on your campaign, and it depends on kind of who you're working with. Sometimes a solidarity action could look like submitting testimony on a piece of legislation. It could look like a social media post, a thank you, or just we support XYZ thing that happened. Thank you to a politician, reaching out to members of the press who tend to get their information from Twitter because it's the quickest way to find something new. And the small size of Rhode Island is an advantage there too. Like when we're talking about testimony on campaigns, I mean, half a dozen people or a dozen people can make the difference of something passing and just getting thrown away. So it requires working with all sorts of people and finding out what they need and what can we offer. And Mike really is at the forefront of trying to really make sure that everybody's represented, and had been doing a lot of great work with a lot of community members of grassroots variety. Mike, did you want to talk about that?
Sure. So we are collaborating with a lot of community-based groups and grassroots organizations, as well as the Narragansett Tribe, which is its own sovereign nation. And two examples I can give specifically include, we worked with the African Alliance of Rhode Island on a grant application with the Department of Environmental Management so that they can actually get resources to do outreach and engagement with the DEM when it comes to the 2025 Climate Action Strategy. So they were funded. They're actually going to be able to have a seat at the table when designing the 2025 Climate Action Strategy, and they're going to have resources to engage their community members to inform based on their own experiences exactly what they need to see in the 2025 strategy. That's one example of what we've been doing on the grassroots and community side. Also, in terms of collaborating with the tribal government of the Narragansett Tribe, that includes a couple things. One is ensuring that they have a literal seat on a subcommittee of the Governor's Workforce Board, which was just set up at the end of last year. It's called the Green Energy Workforce Advisory Committee, and the scope of work for that committee is meant to forecast the green jobs demands of the future, and essentially make sure that we are meeting those workforce needs and making sure that we're using this opportunity to expand access to good wages and good jobs for people that need them most. The Narragansett Tribe is a member of that committee, and also we're working with the tribal government to also know exactly what the funding opportunities are for tribes. There's a lot of formula grants for federally recognized tribes. and ensuring that they have the capacity that they need to basically take advantage of those grant opportunities from the federal government. For example, the Home Energy Rebate Program is one that is due soon, and they're planning on taking advantage of the formula grant that they should be awarded as long as they apply. Those are just a few examples of how we're sort of collaborating and helping to build capacity for folks that might not have the capacity. I think the next example that we can give is sort of on the workforce development side that we're able to do, the only thing that we're able to do hands-on with workforce development. And I'll just shift over to Aislinn on that piece.
Yeah, so how I joined the team was through the Energy Fellows program from the University of Rhode Island. So it's a really good program that gets the next generation of change makers involved in the climate and energy space. I just started grad school and was looking for a way to get into the climate space in a more professional setting, and thankfully it turned out to be a really great match. Program is run through the URI Cooperative Extension. They do a lot of really great community volunteering and outreach and stuff like that. And the Energy Fellows program is one of their big programs. I know a few people on this call have either been in the program or their organizations have taken on Energy Fellows. So it's a really great program that is critical in preparing the green economy leaders of tomorrow. And it gives students a really good chance to enter into this space. And it's a year-long program with a focus on education, energy-based field trips, personal growth, while getting paid. I was really lucky that I was able to join the team full-time this year after graduating, so really was an awesome opportunity. I've gotten to continue some of the work I was doing last year, like the federal tracking and state legislation, but now I get to spend more time on other exciting projects, which has been great. So now I will pass it to our Energy Fellow this year, Ariana.
So one of the reasons that the Energy Fellow program was created was because of the rise in renewable energy and there being a gap in understanding and overall expertise, which has made it really challenging for organizations to hire qualified people for those jobs. So through the University of Rhode Island, students are able to create networks that help build the bench for the next generation of experts in the climate space across the U.S. in different departments like policy, program development, and energy modeling and tracking. I started in January and so far have been researching climate change and other energy-related policies that will contribute to meeting the state's Act on Climate goals. Lately, I have been looking into what a just transition to a net zero economy looks like and other just transition models.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments.